the new backdrop. Am I allowed to do that? Be like,
yeah,
we got new digs.
Welcome, feathered friends and bird nerds, to Raptor Radio, the podcast soaring high above the rest. Get ready to sink your talons into all things American Eagle Foundation and all things Raptor. From majestic eagles to charismatic corvids, we'll be providing you with updates from our roost while educating about the wide, wild world of raptors. The sky's the limit for our host's passion for magnificent birds of prey. Leading us in this endeavor are your hosts, Dr. Robin Miller and Crystal Slusher.
Welcome, eagle enthusiasts, to episode 2 of Raptor Radio. Spring is in the air, and we're here to tell you about the birds and the bees. There's been a lot of buzz lately about eagle's nests, so we wanted to share with you all of our information about the rules of the roost. Crystal, can you talk a little bit more about that buzz?
So the buzz is the Jackie and Shadow nest in Big Bear has 3 eggs inside, and they're outside of the window of hatching.
So what's that window of hatching?
Generally, it's about 35 to 41 days. We've seen as large as, I think, 45 days. And that was with a incubator egg. Saphira, correct. So there's a lot of sadness around that. There's a lot of emotions around that. And there's a lot of discussion about what could have went wrong.
Yeah, I understand that this must be a really emotionally trying and difficult time for the community because everyone was rooting for these eggs to hatch. I saw coverage from People magazine. I saw it advertised on the Weather Channel. And it was such a big deal for these eggs to hatch.
So we can't say for certain why these eggs didn't hatch, but we can talk about some reasons why eggs don't hatch in the wild. So one of the things that we need to look at is fertility. And fertility doesn't mean that the eagle's reproductive organs aren't working. Fertility just means that they were mating outside of a fertile window.
Which is about 2 weeks?
Correct. So that's why bald eagles are observed mating quite often. And that just ensures that they hit that fertile window.
That's 2 weeks in the year?
2 weeks in the year.
Holy cow, that is a very, very small window.
Yeah, and it's also one of the reasons why bald eagles are not known for double clutching. A double clutching was frequently used when bald eagles were on the endangered species list, and they wanted to encourage them to lay more eggs. So pairs that were in human care, the first set of eggs were often taken and artificially incubated. But the second clutch of eggs would be incubated by the parents.
And this is a trick that we've seen used with peregrine falcons and also condors, right?
Correct.
Have we ever seen instances of double clutching in the wild?
Yeah, that generally happens when something happens to the first clutch very early on in incubation. I would say within maybe a week or two of laying the first clutch of eggs.
The fertility window is obviously huge for determining whether or not eggs will hatch, but very, very small in the scope of the year.
Yes. What
are some other reasons those eggs may not have hatched?
Non-viability concerns embryonic development. So there's a whole host of things that could go wrong inside the egg. Mm-hmm. Eggs are porous. Some studies have shown that chicken eggs have about 7,000 pores. And as we know, bald eagle eggs are much larger than a chicken egg. So we can imagine that that's probably a lot more pores. There's all kinds of things that can get inside the egg, like bacteria and fungi, and that promotes disease and illness within the embryo, which can cause death inside of the egg.
That's a really good point, because usually when I think about eggs, I think of this perfectly enclosed kind of ecosystem going on that's completely isolated by exterior pressures and exposure to things like bacteria.
Yeah.
So it's weird to know that eggs have pores.
Yeah. So that's how oxygen gets in and carbon dioxide gets out, is through those pores. Egg turning is an essential part of the incubation process. There's a lot of things that happen during egg turning. Most people think of, it's just, evenly distributing heat, or it's stopping the embryo from being stuck inside the shell. But there's also a lot of other things that happen in there. There's an exchange of gases. There's an exchange of fluids that come from the yolk sac. There's capillaries inside there. So there's just a ton of stuff that could go wrong inside the eggshell during incubation.
The first time you told me about that, you honestly blew my mind, because I used to raise chickens and quail when I was younger as part of like your science experiments. And I always assumed that the eggs had to be turned just for heat exchange, and also to ensure that the embryo didn't develop on one side with kind of lying in the egg strange.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a lot of delicate stuff going on inside of these eggs that we're not entirely aware of, and maybe striving to understand better.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too scientific about it, because I feel like I get lost in it and other people could get lost in it. And I just think that as a way of understanding that there's so much delicate things that happen there that we may not even realize is happening.
That's kind of one of the perils of watching eagle cams. Like, you get such an amazing glimpse into the inner workings of their lives, but sometimes it can lead to more tragic outcomes like this, where we may not get to find answers, and that doesn't make it easier.
Right. And I think that's why people are so sad about them not hatching. And it's a very common occurrence. We just recently had on our cameras the NEFL nest. Gabby laid 2 eggs. Beau buried the first egg for reasons we don't know. And then the second egg never hatched. So whether or not it was fertile or non-viable is something that's just unknown to us. There's just so many things that can go wrong.
Yeah. And I remember you mentioning that improper incubation might have been part of the NEFL situation that we went through.
Yeah, they spent quite a bit of time off of the egg. And so I think it's when they're incubating, you have to you got to check all those boxes in order for that egg to hatch. So it's got to be like this perfect happening in the nest. You have to do everything right.
Parenthood is stressful.
Yeah, it definitely is stressful.
Including for bald eagles.
Yeah.
I read on Cornell, which is an excellent resource for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. So Birds of the World is subscription-based, but you can access some of it for free. But it's estimated that bald eagles need to spend between 95 to 98% of daylight hours incubating their eggs. Yeah. Which is a full-time job. It
is a full-time job, and that's why they take turns in the nest, the male and the female. So what happened in the NEFL nest is that, Beau is a pretty young guy and didn't quite capture what he should be doing. He didn't figure it out until it was almost it was a too late kind of thing, because of course she's got to get up and go relieve herself and find food. He wasn't, he did all the things right except for the incubation part, and that's just inexperience, and that will come in time. I think he gets it now, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a great year next year.
And you've mentioned in the past that inexperienced pairs often don't have their eggs hatch the first year or so as they're just figuring out the ropes, because it is a very delicate process.
Yeah.
So beyond viability, that very narrow fertile window, proper incubation, are there any other factors that could result in an unsuccessful clutch?
Yes. So there's external factors like predators, intruders, weather. The nest could fall. There could be a tussle on the nest between, a competing adult that could crush the eggs. There's just a ton of things that could go wrong. So I think that's reason to celebrate when we do have successful hatches.
It gives me a greater appreciation for how much the odds are stacked against these birds. So going back to Big Bear, which I want to mention again is not American Eagle Foundation's nest or cam.
Right.
We're just discussing it because we love bald eagles.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have some cams of our own where we've seen similar outcomes.
Yeah.
One thing I've seen from the community in particular is understandable concern for Jackie and Shadow's welfare, Jackie in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think the question you're asking is, do eagles grieve? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the simple answer is probably. We just don't know how intense those emotions are. We know that other animals in the animal world grieve, like elephants. And I recently read an article on Audubon about crows. A crow had gotten hit by a car, and a bunch of other crows went to where the deceased bird was and circled around him or it for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then also in the corvid world, magpies are known to bring strands of grass and put around the deceased bird. So I think
that's so sweet and sad at once.
Yeah, I think everything grieves. We just can't measure how intense that emotion is. We do know that they move on very, very quickly, and they have to. They can't show signs of weakness in the wild, but I don't think they linger as long as we do. I think we're more invested in what they're doing and how much effort they've put into incubating those eggs for them not to hatch.
So what I'm hearing is that it may be difficult right now. It's even possible that Jackie is grieving, but she will be able to process and move on and hopefully have better luck next year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that's the case. But it's very hard to determine what a mourning bald eagle looks like, because to me, they always look stern.
Yes. They've got resting eagle face.
They do have resting eagle face. And,
That's
the cries that some people are describing as sorrow, those are typical bald eagle cries. We have a dozen of them right out our back door, and we have some wild ones. And the sounds that people are describing as sorrowful are not. They're just normal bald eagle sounds. With their mates, they do make soft little chirps and things like that. So when the mate arrives on the nest and Jackie is vocalizing or making little chirps, that could just be a conversation that she's having with Shadow.
I think it's natural for people to see something of themselves in the exchanges that we've been observing between Jackie and Shadow and their reaction to the eggs. I do think it's very easy to anthropomorphize, which is not to say it's a bad thing. Like, it's human nature. We see faces on cars. We put eyelashes on them sometimes. And there's this online joke that humans can pack bond with anything.
Yeah.
I think what's beautiful and moving about this situation is that so many people care about these eagles enough to see grief in those behaviors, enough to be concerned about their welfare. And that speaks to the power of webcams.
Yeah, it does. And, I'm very thankful that we have a very strong community on our Eagle Cams. And speaking of Eagle Cams, I want to mention that we have another Eagle Cam coming online.
We do?
We do. It is in California, too.
No way.
Yeah. It's at Folsom Lake and Lake Natoma. We're working with the Friends group there. They are also a nonprofit, just like we are. And we will have, the female there is unnamed. They have chosen not to name their adults, which is perfectly fine. People will find a nickname for them, like they always do. And She's actually sitting on 3 eggs too.
Really?
She is sitting on 3 eggs, and they're due to hatch March 25th.
Ooh,
is our pip window.
watch.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is.
So I'm sorry. So that seems a little later than what we're normally seeing on like the East Coast.
Yes.
Is that normal? Is
It
that like a
is.
normal timeline?
It is normal for California. Different parts of the state have different nesting periods, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife has a really cool chart that kind of breaks down the United States in regions, so you can figure out when the nesting window is for your area.
That is incredible, because the variability of bald eagle nesting habits, I'm obsessed with it. I'm geeking out completely right now, and I apologize to our listeners and viewers for watching me like violently thrum in my seat. Most of the time, bald eagles nest in a mega canopy tree with a commanding view of their surroundings.
Absolutely.
But depending on their region, the type of trees available determines where they actually select their nest to go, and the size and shape of the nest as well. There are areas where bald eagles will nest on the ground, like Arizona and Alaska and Canada.
Yes.
And the nesting timing also changes along with when they choose to start altering their nest. So the further northern birds, I believe, start as early as January.
Yes.
Whereas our nesting window is like, depending on where the nest is,
Florida starts in October sometimes.
Florida starts in October.
Yeah, so it varies by region. It varies by pair, and individuals.
Yeah. So like you have your climate that's affecting it, but like these birds are remarkably individual in how they approach their nest, their little personality quirks, how they decorate their nest too.
Yes.
In addition to the usual greenery that they kind of put in the nest when they return to them year after year to indicate that they're occupied, we've seen some really weird stuff show up in bald eagles' nests. We have seen, oh gosh, what is it? We have seen human clothing.
Yes.
Which is like, did they go to like a garage sale and go shopping? Like, where is this coming from? Rubber rats.
I have a good one for you when
you have a good one for me?
I do.
Oh, I know we've seen like bags show up.
Yes.
What are some of the other weird things, Crystal? Help me out.
A bag with a sandwich inside of it from Subway.
So
$5 footlong.
there's a sponsorship opportunity there.
Right.
We don't fully understand why these items show up in bald eagle nests. Ospreys kind of do similar things. They love shiny objects.
Yes, we've seen flip-flops
Oh, yeah.
in an osprey nest before. It was crazy.
The leading theory is that it shows that it's occupied if they have like a weird eclectic presentation of items in the nest. So
Like a lava lamp?
I would, yeah, lava lamp, inflatable
And a glow-in-the-dark
chairs. Yeah, it's a glow-in-the-dark poster. They put it on a branch over the nest.
Yes.
And speaking of, in the South, is it true that bald eagle nests prefer shady environments?
I think so, yeah. I think there's some call for cover because it gets really hot in the South.
I recall hearing of one instance where bald eagles actually relocated because the tree that they had built a nest in the southern region of the United States was defoliaged by caterpillars.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
So they just up and moved after the caterpillars took over.
I hadn't heard of that one, but that's super interesting.
There goes the neighborhood.
Yeah,
Right?
there goes the neighborhood. They don't like their neighbors.
I don't want to veer you too far off because you got a good conversation going here, Crystal. But Robin had mentioned, she had said something about when they leave. So I've always wondered, when the Eagles leave for the season, do they go far? Do they go, completely different part of the country, or do they stay local?
That's a great question, actually. So people typically think that bald eagles are migratory, and they're partially migratory.
Semi-migratory.
Yes. So they don't really go, I believe some of them, like this is a hard thing to talk about because we don't have GPS or cameras on them to see where they're going constantly.
Yeah.
So there's some thought behind it, and there's some studies behind it that bald eagles will only go as far as they need to find food. And there's also a theory that if they've always migrated throughout their life, they will continue to migrate. Or if they stay in their nest area or in their territory, they'll continue to stay in their nest territory. So I think it kind of varies again, just like the nest and just like the timing of the nesting season. It all varies by individual.
Mm-hmm. They're very, and again, I realize I talked about anthropomorphication earlier in terms of applying human traits to animals, but I sometimes compare them to people deciding to move or people deciding to change up their life or stay put.
Yeah.
It's true of even their youngsters, right?
Yeah. So the first, I would say 4 or 5 years, they're very nomadic. But they tend to follow the same flyway that they usually use. And so that's why you sometimes see during nesting season, these younger birds or birds that are just coming into their adulthood, checking out these nests, because there is a possibility that it is previous offspring. I call these guys floaters, because basically what they're doing is they're flying the same path, they're flying in the same areas, and they're looking to stake their own claim or and find their own territory. And by going to the same places over and over again, there's a possibility they could find an empty nest or a nest in need of a mate.
And just like teenagers, they don't always return to where they were born or choose to stay put. We've had one that we released from our hack tower that ended all the way up in Canada.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's wildly variable between individuals. But talking about the youngsters coming back to stake a claim of territory has brought us to the beginning of the cycle, which would be nest building.
Yes. Nest building. What do you want to know about nest building?
I guess everything.
Okay, so nest building starts with some spring cleaning. They'll come in and they'll remove things that don't need to be there.
So they typically do return to the same nest year after year.
Yes, and they'll use them for years and years and years, as you know.
In Ohio.
How long was that nest used?
34 years.
Yeah. And it was 2 ton, 10 feet in diameter, and 20 feet high.
And it was wine glass shaped.
Yeah. There's also different shapes of nests.
In the Southwest, they're shaped like margarita glasses.
That's a good shape.
True.
There's
don't
a
cite me on
theme
that.
here.
And then they'll also, bring in new sticks, grasses, and things like that, because after the previous season of raising youngsters in that nest, it probably looks like a pancake and looks like it is an unusable nest. So typically it takes them, I think if a nest falls and they're within their season, they need to rebuild really fast. So I think I've seen a nest built within 3 weeks.
Ooh.
But from scratch.
Impressive.
Yes.
Both the male and female participate in building the nest, but sometimes the female has strong opinions on where the sticks go.
Yes, she does. When I first started watching bald eagles in the wild, I was under the assumption that the male calls the shots. I quickly learned that that is not the case. He could come in and put that stick wherever he wants, but the minute he leaves, she's going to do whatever she wants.
It's interesting to me, too, because there's a theory that the female selects the territory because she is larger. So she is the one that is typically defending the territory against intruders, being that
Yes.
she's large and in charge.
Yes.
About 30% larger than male counterparts. And you'll hear me say that often on the podcast. I'm just warning you now. There was also observed that when a female lost her mates, the males maintained the same territory that she was holding, the suitors that came afterwards.
Yeah.
So there's more research to be done on that. We may completely reverse our knowledge in years to come and realize that it's more a 50-50 decision as to where the
I
territory
think
boundaries
you might be
are.
onto the 50-50 thing because our nest that we had in DC, the male selected the territory. He was the first one to show up.
Mr. President.
Yeah, he was the first one to show up. And then all of a sudden, another one started showing up, which was the first lady. And so she left. He maintained the area.
That's true.
And brought in Lotus. So I think we're about 50-50.
Did he bring in Lotus after
I don't know. I think she kind of came in and took over.
Yeah.
She was a very commanding female.
Lotus is short for...
Lady of the United States.
Because of Mr. President. So
Correct.
that was the best way we could follow up the First Lady.
Yes.
TFL.
Yeah, you can't. It was hard to follow up TFL. She was a beast of an eagle.
Beast of the East.
She was. She was. She was very, very aggressive about defending her territory, defending her nest. She would come in, like if there was an interloper in her nest, she would come in like a rocket. And it was incredible to watch how fast she was actually going. Like I know that there's some speed tests done on bald eagle flying, but I can guarantee you she was exceeding whatever that speed limit was.
She was so much fun to watch.
Yes, she was.
Crystal, you and Robin have mentioned territory several times, so they do maintain a certain area around them, but also will they have multiple nests in that territory?
Oh yeah, I think 1 to 2 nests is pretty normal.
I think the average came out as like 1.5 with
Yeah.
as many as 5. So
Yes.
just like individuals, humans, they might decide to take up multiple residencies and just go occupy the nest that feels right for them in that moment.
And the funny thing about that is like if they're in their current nest and something happens and they view that as a failure, they can and will build a nest elsewhere within their territory.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that may lead to that. So,
Yes.
like obviously the nest kind of deteriorating would be one. Human activity.
Human activity.
What else?
Parasites.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Parasites within the nest. Failed clutches. Things like that.
A squirrel tearing it apart?
Yeah,
Actually,
squirrel.
squirrels, lizards, frogs, all kinds of things like that live within the nest.
Where did we see that yellow rat snake recently?
Oh gosh. What nest was that? That was in Florida, was it?
It might have been.
We have a Larry the lizard in Florida that frequents the nest who eats up all the little bugs.
I geeked out about the yellow rat snake appearance. They're beautiful animals.
And then the DC nest had squirrels living underneath it, which caused the nest to collapse last 2 seasons ago.
Oh my goodness. And
Yeah.
there's also that viral video of the flying squirrel bouncing off the eagle's back in the middle of the night.
That was Big Bear.
That was Big Bear.
It was Big Bear.
That eagle was so mad.
Oh yeah, the wing slap is a
The
real
wing
thing.
slap.
Yeah,
And
those
you-
don't feel great.
No, they don't. I could feel it through the screen when that
Yeah.
happened. I'm glad the flying squirrel cleared out as quickly as they did.
Yeah, for sure.
So we talked a little bit about numbers of nests within a territory. I also think it's really cool how eagles will mark the boundaries of their territory. They have defined landmarks that they use. So with red-tailed hawks, like that might be an actual road. It might be the edge of a river. There's also a set height for territory. So
Yeah.
if a bird is approaching what it knows to be another bird's territory, can show that it means no aggression by hitting that altitude and passing safely through. So we talked about building the nest, why eagles might move, how they kind of select their nesting territory and what that entails. We geeked out aggressively there for several minutes, so hopefully it was entertaining, but I want to bring it back to Big Bear and talk about the future for this season.
Okay. So I think there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen with those eggs and where they're going to go. And so there could be a few things that happen. The parents could move them off the nest. They could bury them within the nest, which is probably what we'll see. They'll just become part of the nest.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there's also some questions about how long she's going to continue incubating. And that's why I kind of don't feel like she's grieving at this point. I don't think that there's the sadness there because I don't know that they have the concept of time like we do. Like we know eggs are supposed to hatch within 35 days. I don't think that they have a calendar or anything like that sitting there checking off days and saying, okay, 2 more days.
You mean that's not part of the yolk sac?
I don't think so. So I think they just have to come to terms that the eggs are not hatching. And once they get there, they'll spend less and less time on the nest. But being that she's still incubating, she still has, I feel like she still might have that hope that something is going to happen. And I don't know if that hope is even the right word. She still may feel like something is going to happen.
Her instincts are still guiding her to incubate.
Correct.
We don't know when that hormone switch will flip.
Yep.
One thing I want to circle back to is the fact that there's a chance of the eggs getting buried. I think that's something that we see with prey items brought to the nest. In order to keep it clean, they may bury older remnants.
Sometimes that happens if it's not completely consumed, which is a rarity, unless your parents are overzealous and bring in crazy amounts of food.
In which case you have a pantry.
Yes, a pantry of food.
That's where that size difference in eagles comes in handy because the female is able to catch larger prey and the male is able to catch smaller prey. So the kids are getting a variety there.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the prey items, sometimes like fur and bones become a part of the nest. Anything that's consumable is probably going to get consumed. Sometimes the parents will throw things off of the edge of the nest. So it's kind of funny, like when we go to do our maintenance on the cams, sometimes we find jaw bones and things like that, armadillo tails, just crazy things on the ground that they've consumed.
Wild. Yeah, Cornell thinks that they sometimes keep material in the nest to avoid attracting mammals and alerting them to the location of the nest.
Yeah.
They actually keep it pretty tidy.
Yeah, they do. Mammals are, like, especially raccoons, are terrible about raiding bald eagle nests. Ravens are also something that is frequent in the bald eagle nest.
Yes.
And we do see a lot of attacks from great horned owls.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Great horned owls. And I don't know, like, if it's just that they're in the same nesting territory and they're nesting around the same time frame. So we've seen barn owls, our barred owls, and I mean, our Smoky Mountain nest had a little tiny screech owl that knocked one of the female for a loop because she was sitting there and it was at night and this little tiny screech owl just came in and hit her and she was like, wait a minute, what was that?
I love screech owls. They're very much the chihuahua of the owl world. Like, we are fortunate that screech owls are not larger than they are because we would all be in trouble.
This is a fact. Birds of prey are opportunistic, so they're going to look for any opportunity to find a quick meal. And they're going to utilize their resources as efficiently as possible. So there is a potential that this great horned owl may have been looking for a meal.
It's true. Yeah, we've seen that happen before. It's difficult to watch, but it is nature in its most raw form, which is any opportunity that can help survival will be taken.
Yeah. I always refer to nature as bittersweet because there's just some really beautiful moments and then there's some really sad moments.
Okay. We spent a lot of time talking about the better parts of nature, what happens when the eggs don't hatch and why that may be the case.
Yeah.
I want to end this episode on a high-flying note and talk about the beautiful instances where the eggs do hatch and what that looks like. One word we've said repeatedly that we have not really touched on is pip.
Yeah.
So what is a pip?
So there's two kinds of pips. There's an internal pip
And a pip squeak?
and an external pip. The pip squeak comes after the hatch is complete.
Yes, when they become bobbleheads.
Bobbleheads, yeah. That's not a technical term, by the way.
Don't at me.
Right, exactly. I think that term bobblehead comes from just the fact that they don't have that muscular control over their heads and their necks.
It's very cute when they're at that stage. But let's continue talking about the internal and external pips.
Okay, so the internal pip is when the internal membrane is been pierced. And you can sometimes hear them tripping inside the egg. And the external pip is when there's an actual visible hole.
And we start counting pip watch when there's an external visible hole on our Eagle cams.
Actually, we start counting pip watch within the time frame of the incubation.
35 to 41 days. And then when we see that external visible hole, that's when we have officially pipped.
Yes, we've officially pipped and we are on hatch watch.
Hatch watch. That's right.
Yeah.
I missed the hatch parties.
All Eagle cam terms.
Yes.
Have been used for several years. So the parents will continue to brood the eaglets until they can no longer fit underneath. Even though some of them might still try to crawl underneath their parents.
It's very cute.
It is very cute. I particularly like the fuzzy slipper stage where it looks like, so like when the eagles have two, it kind of looks like when they're sitting in front of their parent that they look like they got little fuzzy slippers on.
Yeah, the memory foam.
Yes, love it. That is like one of my favorite times during the nesting season. They grow very rapidly. At about 6 to 8 weeks of age, they're practically full grown, same size as their parents. Oftentimes people think that they're bigger than their parents. And that is because of their feathers.
They have training wheels.
They do have training wheels. That is the best way to describe the feathers of a first-year bird.
Yeah, they're longer, and that helps them compensate for a lack of muscle mass. That helps them fly. So it's literally kind of like training wheels. Before you can balance on the bicycle, you got those extra supports before they can really fly well and have all that strength and stamina developed. They've got the longer feathers.
Yes. And that also helps them with sticking a landing. Landings are probably the hardest thing for them to nail down once they leave, once they fledge.
So we're kind of getting into the branching phase of development here.
Yes.
Like they at around 3 to 4 weeks, they start to get those flight feathers in along the humerus, and then the rest of them start to come in. And then what do they start doing as branchers?
So they'll flap their wings, they'll hover in place, they'll do a lot of flapping, and that is why that nest looks like a pancake, because they are bouncing around. They'll bounce, they'll get air, they'll flap their wings in response to winds.
Navigate the branches around the nest,
Yep.
which is where we get that term.
Branching, yeah. Branching typically happens within the nest tree itself. A lot of people think, because they're not in the nest anymore, they fledged. Fledging is actually taking that first flight away from the nest.
And up to half of nest departures are what we call fledges.
Fledges, yeah.
Why is that?
It's an accidental fledge. And people do have the worry that they're going to not make it back to the nest. Most of them do make it back to the nest. It might take several days. They might need to level up from branch to branch to branch to get back that high. But they do.
Yeah, they're calling to the parents the whole time. The parents are still feeding them.
Correct. Yeah, they'll feed them on the ground. Their bald eagles are probably one of the most dedicated parents I think I've ever witnessed as far as birds go. Yeah. And it could just be that I'm an eagle fanatic. I love eagles. I've spent a much of my adult life studying them. So, but I do think that they're one of the most coolest birds to watch go through the process.
It's really incredible to witness, and I'm so grateful that we have the technology to showcase and share with the world.
Yeah.
This sort of unseen parental dedication.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed watching all of American Eagle Foundation's cams, and also the cams that aren't American Eagle Foundations.
Yeah, there's some really wonderful cams out there. And like I said, we're excited about the new cam coming up, and we're excited for a new year at NEFL. And we're even excited for Jackie and Shadow to have another season together, and another successful season together. That is, yeah.
So let's bring this cycle of life back to the beginning.
Yeah.
They depart the nest at approximately 8 to 14 weeks.
Yep.
Do they stick around?
Yeah, some of them will stick around for months, actually. And some of them will take off, and it will be the last time you see them. Or knowingly see them, because you can't tell what they look like after they've become an adult. You don't know that that's them anymore unless they have like a crazy distinguishing feature.
Yes.
Like a flat toe. But yeah, they do hang around. They do rely on their parents. The parents still will feed them as long as they're hanging around. Bald eagles are monkey see, monkey do. So they follow their parents around. They'll see what their parents are doing. They learn from watching and trial and error. And part of that trial and error is scavenging.
Yeah, we often don't think about bald eagles as scavengers, but the truth is that they often dine shoulder to shoulder with our vultures.
Absolutely.
Which
It's
is
a great way to find a meal.
Yeah, which is why it's so important to hunt and fish responsibly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because if they're going by those waterways and looking for dead fish, or if they're going through the woods and they see a carcass that might have some lead fragments still in it, that would likely push them in the direction of being one of the 50% that do not make it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That first year is really, really hard. They have a lot of things that they have to learn in that short period of time. And once they leave their natal nesting area, they're on their own. The parents are not there to help them cross the strait or navigate, flying alongside of a highway or anything like that. They are on their own.
I bring that up strategically because in the coming episodes, we'll be announcing an exciting conservation venture.
Yes.
I can't share the details yet, but our goal is to make the nesting habitats of bald eagles safer than ever before. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that program. It really hits close to home for so many of us here at AEF, and
it's making good on a promise we made.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are going to be a lot more details about that, and we'll go into depth about that when the time is right.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else about bald eagle nests that we did not cover this episode?
I'm sure there's more. There's a lot of things that I probably have talked about so often that I've forgotten. And I know my community will probably call me on some of those things. So if you have any additional questions that we didn't answer today, please let us know in the comments or by reaching out at media@eagles.org.
We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
And I think we should close this episode out per tradition now. Crystal, what's a favorite bird fact you want to share with listeners?
Favorite bird fact. One of the things that I have observed in bald eagle courtship.
Yes.
We did not cover courtship.
We didn't cover courtship.
Some of the cool things that I've observed in the nest is that the female will bite the male on the head while they're working in their nest, doing their nestorations, or she'll kick them. And I love that.
I love the feistiness of bald eagle courtship.
Yeah.
The cartwheeling is also incredible.
Incredible.
They will latch talons in the air and spiral and cartwheel down. It's harrowing to a witness, but incredible when you realize the birds are fine.
Yeah, we actually witnessed that here at our new location.
Right here, we have a pair.
Yes,
it
we
was
do.
my first time seeing it in the wild. I screamed and I cried a little bit.
And we hugged.
We
were so excited.
This is the behind the scenes content that our listeners want. That does not count as my bird fact, though.
No, it doesn't.
I want to talk about Bergman's rule, which is the idea that the further north you go with living organisms, the larger they tend to be. This is true for bald eagles, which is why Alaskan bald eagles are so much larger than their southern counterparts, to the extent that some people believe they're a subspecies all their own.
Yeah.
What's fun about Bergman's rule is it also applies to the size of their eggs.
Yeah.
So the further north you go, the larger the bald eagle's eggs become. So take pity on those Alaskan females, listeners.
That's awesome. I love that fact. That's probably one of the funnest facts that we have about bald eagles.
Yeah, so like you can get some huge disparity once you factor in the sexual dimorphism, the fact that females are 30% larger than their male counterparts. With Bergman's rule.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. And I think that's where we will land this episode and allow it to rest in the nest.
Yeah.
Until
I
next
approve
time.
of that pun.
Oh my gosh. A pun Ryan approves
I
of.
mean, we'll just I'll just stay here perched on my branch until next time.
So by the time this is coming to your viewing screens or ears, we should be found everywhere that you can listen to podcasts, so be sure to support us by visiting eagles.org, or you can always like, follow, and review us wherever you choose to listen and or watch us. I have to say one more thing before the true end of this episode, which is this lovely backdrop was built by our facilities manager, Merv, but the wood...
Merv.
He's amazing. The wood was sourced from my fence. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
So this was literally at your house.
This was literally at my house,
Yeah.
and now it's here at my second home at AEF.
Well, we need to get decorations for it.
We do.
Yeah.
So I guess that's something the community could actually pitch in.
If you want to send us things for our set, feel free. We are at 510 Kodak Road, Kodak, Tennessee, 37764.
Until next time, eagle enthusiasts.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.